Hey, welcome to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and as usual, we're brought to you by Open Source Self-Defense, Fitness, and Grappling. Okay, everybody. So first and foremost, a little bit of an acknowledgement. Like I said, I'm going to be toying with putting segments together via different modes. So trying out a different mode today for this first part of the segment. So forgive me if the sound is not spectacular. It's the first time I'm trying this. So all that being said, let's move on. So what I wanted to talk about today is, the fact that you need to have your child in Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I know I did a, show a while back on having your child in, combat sports or contact sports and the reason why that was important. And I still do believe that. That being said, I want to specifically talk about Jiu-Jitsu and why you need to have your child enrolled in a quality Jiu-Jitsu academy, a quality Jiu-Jitsu school, okay? So there's this concept, the concept of the whole, participation medal, the concept of, the 8th place trophy, if you will. And, that whole concept was born out of an idea that, we don't want to measure children in a way that destroys their ego, right? We don't want to destroy how they feel about themselves, the way they view themselves. And I think that when it initially started, it came from a place of, good intentions. And, people thought, well, if we praise children for taking on hard tasks and at least they participated, at least they saw it through, that was all good. Now, the problem is that we've gone so far to the extreme that we want to give trophies and we want to give, accolades for people coming in last, for people just participating. And while some things should be celebrated because you participated and because you actually, finished something, that isn't, the same for everything. And what I mean is for instance, if you enroll in college and you go into the engineering program and you see that through and you graduate with an engineering degree, you might not be the top of your class, i.e. finish first. That being said, it's still an accomplishment that you saw that through because that is, a smaller subset of students that can do that, right? Same if we're talking maybe special forces trainings for military, right? If you see yourself through and you can get through, some type of special forces training and you get that beret or you get those wings or whatever the case may be, you are more elite than just the people who are in the military. So even though you may have not been the best in your class, you're still in an elite group, so that should be celebrated, right? And very similarly, that's how it is for a lot of sports and a lot of things that we can do. For instance, running a marathon. Not a lot of people can complete a marathon. Not a lot of people ever do complete a marathon. So you do deserve some recognition that you completed it. However, that being said, you shouldn't be getting the exact same accolades and the exact same benefit as the person who finished first. And that's where I think we have gone way too far with our children in giving them, recognition for participation. We've gone way too far. And it's not just what I think, it's what a lot of the research says. A lot of the psychological research that they've been doing, the psychology research that they've been doing, they've found that, these 8th place trophies, these participation medals, that not only do they diminish the accomplishments of the person who finishes first, right, and they no longer feel as accomplished, but it also starts to ruin, the person who got the the 8th place trophy, if you will, the participation medal, it starts to actually lower their self-esteem as well, because they know that they're not really deserving of a trophy, right, or of a medal. And so, that is why we need to have our kids in jiu-jitsu. And let me explain. So on the one hand, you can break this up into two categories, like objective and subjective, right? And when I say objective, what I'm talking about is that some things are objective, right? Like there's a right, there's a wrong, it's binary, right? You win, you lose, the L, the W. Some things are subjective, right? In the sense that, well, you have to put things into context, and there are many shades of gray, and in comparison to. Well, the beauty of jiu-jitsu is that it gives you both of those, right? It gives a child both of those. So a child gets to compete against themselves and really gets to, measure how well they're doing in comparison to when they started, right? And that would be, through belt promotions and things of that nature. And, they get to see, oh, my belt is changing color, or I'm getting colored stripes. And so they get to measure themselves against their own progress. But the part that's missing in most traditional sporting leagues now is that it's either one or the other. You either have, recreational leagues, which is, oh, we're just playing for the fun of it and to measure ourselves against ourselves, or you have competitive leagues where it's all about competition, and a lot of times those coaches take it to a ridiculous level where, at the age of 8, 9, 10, they're recruiting teams, right, and putting together essentially all-star teams. But you get that same benefit in jiu-jitsu, because not only do you get that, oh, I just get to compete against myself, and that kind of holistic philosophical approach, but you also get the binary win-loss approach as well, because when you get your child into a quality jiu-jitsu program, they get to compete against other children of their same, skill level or approximate skill level. They get to, compete for medals. They get to compete in tournaments. At the very least, they should be sparring in class, and I do believe in sparring for children, especially in grappling arts, because we're not talking about big, giant concussive hits on the head. Now, I understand some people who don't want their children, sparring in boxing or kickboxing, or possibly even in the harder styles of karate where they actually allow them to strike to the head or strike period. I understand why they wouldn't want their children hit in the head, right? I get that. However, that being said, jiu-jitsu has a very low risk for that. Wrestling has a very low risk for that. So in those grappling arts, you have a low risk for those things. And since jiu-jitsu has a low risk for trauma to the head, I believe that children should be sparring, because it does lend that binary I won or I lost measurement against the person who's better than me, right? And did I improve myself and get to measure myself against, somebody else, and where do I stand? Where do I stand in that hierarchy? And this is the beauty of jiu-jitsu in its state right now, right? Is that it hasn't been yet completely infected through the ridiculous competition to where, you have coaches running around trying to poach kids just to put together a competition class, even though they can't really teach. What they're doing is they're getting the kids that look like they're on steroids and just throwing them together, right? Like, that's essentially what a lot of coaches do, like with soccer, football, baseball, is essentially they look for the biggest, strongest kids, the kids that already have natural abilities, stick them on their team, and then like pretend as if they're an awesome coach, right? when all in all, really what they are is a really awesome salesperson, because they sold the parent on, oh, your kid should play on my team because of X, Y, and Z. But coaching wise, anybody could have coached that group of kids to be, top 5 finishing, or top 10 finishing, or, top 3 finishing, and getting to the trophies in those competitive leagues, right? So that's where Jiu-Jitsu shines. And this is why you need to have your child in Jiu-Jitsu. They need to be in Jiu-Jitsu because they need both. They don't just need to be in the participation, oh, thank you so much for showing up league, okay? But they also don't need to be consistently and always compared to the superstar, right? There has to be some room in the middle, and there needs to be that balance. And that's the reality when it comes to having kids involved in sports, and when you want them to learn valuable and precious lessons. And in that, I believe that Jiu-Jitsu is very unique, that it gives that. You have the ability to just measure yourself against yourself, while at the same time still measuring yourself against your peers. And so it's a beautiful thing. And that's why you need to have your kid in Jiu-Jitsu. All right, guys. That's what I have to say on that comment. Go ahead and splice this up and see what we got in the next side. Okay, guys, let's get into it. So in this segment, I want to talk a little bit about Conor McGregor and who Conor should be fighting next. And because it kind of plays into it, we're going to talk just a bit about Khabib and Tony, and how Khabib could win the fight. All right, so first let's talk about Tony and Khabib, because I think it does have an impact on who Conor fights next and when Conor fights next. With the Tony and Khabib fight, I've already talked about the idea that it could be a GSP versus big rig kind of issue, where, Tony's able to do a significant amount of damage, and Khabib still wins the fight on points. So I don't want to rehash that. If you want to hear that, you can listen to the last show. I talked a little bit about my theory on that. That being said, let's talk about how Khabib wins his fight with Tony. It's pretty simple. I mean, the game plan is a pretty simple game plan. Do what you do. Okay? I mean, Khabib pretty much has one way to win this match, the way that I see it. He has one way to win this fight. And it's a pretty simple game plan. That doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean that anybody can do it. It's just fairly simple strategically. You push Tony up against the cage, you take him down, and you ground and pound him for the entire fight. You use the fact that Tony believes in his jiu-jitsu skills and his wrestling skills so completely that at times he will give up the bottom position. He'll basically concede and take the bottom position. And if you're Khabib, you need to capitalize on that arrogance or that ego, whatever you want to call it. So there you have it. It's pretty simple. That is the way that Khabib is going to win that fight. If he wins the fight, that's how he's going to win the fight. Okay? Don't give me any of this about, oh, we haven't seen the skills. I listen to some of these talking heads that do a lot of, shows, and mostly do it for clickbait, if you ask me. But they talk about how, oh, well, Khabib, he's so good. And then the thing is he's just not really showing us anything because this is working, so why would you do anything else besides? No. Look, I agree that if something's working and you don't have to show a bunch of other stuff, you don't do it. But we saw what happened when he decides he's going to stand on his feet and he's going to exchange, okay? He doesn't win those exchanges, okay? He does not win. And I'm not talking about the one punch that he landed on Conor, the eagle punch that he's landed on a lot of guys, okay? Because they're already thinking takedown. Okay, it plays in perfect. It's a beautiful strategy. There's nothing wrong with it. It's nothing wrong with the fact that that's how you land your strikes. It's exactly, what a lot of the old school ground and pounders did. A Randy Couture, for instance. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But just stop with the nonsense that, he's going to stand and bang, with the strikers in this division, that he's going to outclass a boxer. I mean, even this nonsense about his dad wanting him to box Floyd Mayweather. Come on, guys. Look at the way he moves in the ring. He doesn't even move like a striker. He doesn't even move in that manner. He moves in a way that a grappler would move. Okay? That just is what it is. And yes, you can change things up. I know you can change things up. But you would poo-poo the same thing if I said, well, Conor's going to go in there and take somebody down and ground and pound them. You would laugh and you would think that that was nonsense. So let's just be real. Let's be real about what his skill set is. And that's his skill set. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's very efficient. It's very effective. He's very, very good at it. That's not a disrespect. Okay? It's just being honest. It's just being real. So let's say that Khabib were to win the match against Tony. Well then, guys, if he wins the match against Tony, either McGregor is a liar, or, excuse me, maybe I'm being a little bit too audacious, or McGregor exaggerated, because Khabib is not going to fight him until maybe July. Why? Because if he wins against Tony, that's in early April. Ramadan starts in mid to late April. And if you didn't know, that's the religious, I don't know what it's called exactly, but I know that, Muslims fast during that period, pretty much from dawn until dusk, I believe it is. And so he's not going to take on any fights, or, he's not going to do any of that stuff during Ramadan. And this is pretty well known. So he's not going to take any fights. So he's probably not going to fight. Ramadan goes all into May, I believe, mid-May, early May. And so that would mean then that if he, for instance, were to lose weight or need to get back into shape, I don't know if he trains or not. I've heard that a lot of Muslims will not even train during Ramadan if they're in a sport. The only Muslim I've ever seen that was an athlete that actually competed during Ramadan was Hakeem Olajuwon. And that was the only one. And you could see when he did compete during Ramadan, you could see a significant drop-off in his energy and his skills, the amount of minutes he had to spend on the bench. So I can only imagine, if that's in a non-contact sport such as basketball, I can only imagine that in the sport of MMA, that it's that much more important that, you take it easy. So most likely, that would mean that McGregor wouldn't be fighting him till June. I mean, a decent camp with a decent amount of time to put his weight back on him, if he lost any weight, the Khabib that is, right, isn't going to happen until June. And that would mean that McGregor that would not be on the pace that McGregor has said that he wants to fight. He said he wants to fight, be very active this year. And I believe that he said he wanted to fight 3 times this year. He was focusing on March of this year. That's, if he fights in March, even if he knocks somebody out, it doesn't matter. Even if he has a fight very similar to the Cerrone fight, right? A 40-second knockout again. How is he going to turn around and fight? How is Khabib going to be ready to fight him? So the only way Conor is fighting Khabib in the near future, in my opinion, would be if Tony were to pull out of the fight, or if he waits until June, more likely waits until July or August to fight him. Which in that case, he's not going to get 3 fights in the year, because after that fight, unless he were able to knock Khabib out in the first round and not take any damage, his body's not going to be ready to turn around and fight again. And that's best case scenario, right? I mean, that's best case scenario. You know, the other thing to consider as far as, you know, Conor fighting Khabib is what happens if a scenario similar to what, you know, I said in the last show happens, to where it's a very close fight, a very contested fight between Tony and Khabib, and it's a back and forth kind of match. Well, then I'm pretty sure that with the recency bias that infects the MMA fan base, you know, and I'm part of it, I'm not going to say that I'm not, but we have serious recency bias. I don't see how fans aren't clamoring if it's a super close back and forth fight, and let's say it's a split decision. How are people not clamoring for the rematch? And so that would put Tony to the front of the line for a second time. And again, would leave Conor out of the mix. So this idea that Conor is going to get a title shot, that Dana's pushing, it's not in the best interest of the UFC. It's not in the best interest of Conor McGregor. I guess maybe it's in the best interest of the UFC. Maybe you can sell that fight. I don't think you can. I don't think it sells super well right now. Okay? If Conor has one more fight and he wins decisively, and if he wins at 155, then I think you have, or if he beats a super powerful but smaller, you know, 170er, then you have, you know, a viable way to say, hey, look, he's back. He's going to drop down to 155, or hey, he came back to 155. He knocked this guy out, or he beat this guy. He's ready for Khabib. And then you're looking at possibly a fight card going on in, you know, July or August with the Khabib rematch, right? Then you could say that if Khabib goes on to beat Tony. So with all that being said, I think Conor's next fight is going to initially be scheduled the weekend after the Tony and Khabib fight. And it's going to be scheduled on that weekend very strategically, because what that'll do, and it'll be at a 155 pound weight class. And the reason why they will do that, and the reason why that's going to come, is because that becomes in the UFC's best interest. Because let's be real, as much as I'm a fan of Tony and as much as I like watching Khabib, and as much as I want to see this fight, these two have been scheduled to fight multiple times, and it's just not happened. So the UFC would be very wise to schedule a Conor McGregor fight against a very tough and game 155 opponent the weekend after, so that both of those fighters would be in striking distance of making the 155 pound weight limit at the same time as the Khabib and Tony fights coming up, just in case one of them pulls out. Then not only do you have the option of Conor fighting, but you also have the option of having the other 155 pounder stepping in to fight, right? So you give yourself two options. So it's a little bit of redundancy in the system. Now, who would that person be? Well, I don't think Masvidal is going to drop to 155. Let's just be real. Masvidal making his money at 170 right now. He's a force there. The reality is he should be getting the next title shot. He's dominating in his wins. What is this? 3 wins in a row he's had now. You know, it's time for him to fight a tougher upper level 170er. I don't even know how he's not number 3 already, but you know, whoever is up there, he needs to be fighting that next in line. Maybe Tyrone Woodley, right? Maybe a Tyrone Woodley. That's who I would match him up against. That would give you at least somewhat of a preview as to how he would deal with wrestling. Tyron Woodley is a pretty decent wrestler, so I think that would be a good matchup for him. So that would leave kind of Conor again out of the mix, because you do not want to schedule him to fight 170 the weekend after, because he could possibly miss the 155-pound cutoff if he wanted to step in for one of the other guys. So, who's at 155 that right now is a draw and that's been on a tear? Well, you have Dustin Poirier, who's fought Khabib but lost to Khabib, right? Who Conor has beaten before. And if you're really looking to pad Conor's stats in order to make sure he makes it to August, July to get a rematch with Khabib should Khabib win, well, you know, last time he dealt with Poirier pretty easily, so it may be a little bit safer fight for him. It's a guy who, yes, has good wrestling and has good ground skills, but primarily is a standing fighter, is a striker. So that plays into, you know, McGregor's strategy and McGregor's idea of, you know, how he wants to fight and what he thinks a fight is. Then the other one besides that would be Justin Gaethje. Now, here's the thing. I'm a big fan of Justin Gaethje. That being said, I know a lot of people think that he has the kryptonite for Conor McGregor, i.e. the ground game, the wrestling. But, I mean, that's not what he's shown. You know, because at this point, it's really rumor. It really is rumor that Gaethje is a good wrestler. Because since I've seen him in the UFC, I haven't seen an ounce of MMA wrestling out of him. So, at this point, it's just a rumor. If we're being honest, it's a rumor that he's a good wrestler. Who knows? And because he has shown such a lack of understanding or a lack of desire to take the fight there, I think that, you know, if he's going to stand and he's going to essentially box, because that's what Gaethje does. He does some boxing. He throws in some really nasty leg kicks. Okay, but essentially he boxes, keeps up that high guard, and that's what he does. I know a lot of people think that he has this amazing gas tank, but I didn't see that. When you watch the Eddie Alvarez fight between him and Justin Gaethje, you saw Eddie Alvarez finally figured out the answer to this high guard is to go to his body. He went to his body relentlessly, and he broke Justin Gaethje that way. He essentially gassed him via body shots. And if you think that McGregor and his team aren't smart enough to watch that tape and go, okay, we're going to go, if he's going to go high guard, we're going to the body, then you're crazy. You're just crazy. I don't understand why you would think that that is a style that's not good for McGregor. Now, the only thing that might give McGregor a hard time is the fact that Gaethje comes forward. Because Conor does like to be the aggressor. Conor does like to be the person who puts the pressure on and dictates where the fight happens. That being said, I just don't know if Gaethje is going to be... He just seems to be so stubborn about utilizing any of his wrestling. And if he's going to be that stubborn, I think that, you know, Conor does get him. Now, here's the other part of that. Conor's also a businessman, right? UFC is also about business. Conor does understand settling scores as well. Gaethje is managed by Ali. In my opinion, Ali does not want Gaethje and Khabib fighting, but after this Tony fight, it's going to be really, really hard to say, oh no, don't fight Conor, don't fight Gaethje, fight somebody else. Who else is there left to fight if you're Khabib? You either rematch with Conor if Conor's on a tear, Or you fight Gaethje, who's on a tear. But Ali represents both of those guys. He represents both Gaethje and Khabib. So it would behoove Ali to give a tough fight to Gaethje. Hopefully Gaethje, and it doesn't matter what happens. If Gaethje wins, yeah, he has to fight Khabib, but there's a lot bigger press about it. It makes everybody a lot of money. Guess what? A lot of that money goes into Ali's pockets. If Conor wins, well, that means he doesn't have to worry about the intricacies of how do I do this deal when, you know, Gaethje's my guy, but so is Khabib. He doesn't have to worry about it, right? So there's a lot of pros and cons there. So my prediction for who Conor's going to fight next, because it's what's in the best interest of the UFC and it's in what's in the best interest of Conor. And not only that, but Ali is becoming, like I said before, I don't really like the guy. I don't think he's a great guy. I don't, personally, I think he's kind of a schmuck, but you got to admit he's a damn good manager, and he always does what's in the best interest of his fighters. And he also finds a way to make himself a little good, a little chunk of cheddar while he's doing it. So you got to give him respect for that. I think this is what Ali maybe wants to make happen. So I think it's going to be Gaethje and Conor scheduled at 155 right after the weekend after the Khabib and Tony fight. And don't be surprised if, either Gaethje or Conor step in at the last minute should one of those guys not be able to go. And here's my thing. I think if it's Khabib that pulls out, I think they throw Justin Gaethje in there. If it's Khabib that pulls out, I think they throw Conor McGregor in there. I think Dana is set on he wants Conor to rematch Khabib. I think he's set on that. So he's going to try and find a way to make that happen. All right, guys, let's move on. Oh, before we move on to the next subject, let's not forget that the John Jones-Reyes fight is coming up on us quick. So we're going to have to get in a little bit deeper to that one because that seems really interesting to me. It seems like a really interesting fight. I talked a little bit about it last week, but over the next couple of weeks, maybe we should look at it a little deeper. All right, guys. We'll catch you later. Let's see what's coming up on the next segment. Well, guys, I guess there's not going to be another segment. Just realized that we're going a bit long. So, thank you for listening once again to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. Remember, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose, guys.